Mr. President, I want to add to what my colleagues have been saying here. Big disappointment from us on this side of the aisle that our Democratic colleagues blocked this bill to do what needs to happen with regard to the ICC. Senator Ricketts was just making a really good point with regard to the blatant anti-Semitism at that organization. And it's not new, Mr. President. We all know this is happening, which is why it was a disappointment we couldn't move forward. And it's also something we know has been happening at the UN. Mr. President, I had a Wall Street Journal op-ed a couple months ago when President Biden was getting ready to go to make his last major speech at the UN. And I strongly but respectfully requested the president to make his speech about focusing on the systemic anti-Semitism that has existed at the United Nations for years, and to call out the true terrorists in the world, which is Iran. President Biden didn't make that speech. I had a meeting with the UN Secretary General and now former Senator Ben Cardin, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. It was a bipartisan meeting with the UN Secretary General, and we pressed him. We pressed him hard on his leadership of the UN and the systemic anti-Semitism that exists in these international bodies, these international organizations. The UN is going to have a wake-up call with our new ambassador, Elise Stefanik. I think she's going to really raise these issues, really press these issues. She's going to be a modern-day Jeane Kirkpatrick, who, in my view, is our best UN ambassador ever under President Reagan. She's going to bring it. So the UN, the Secretary General, stand by. You're going to hear a lot more of this from our incoming UN ambassador. She's going to do a great job. Finally, Mr. President, I just want to mention we're focused on the ICC. We're focused on the UN appropriately. This bill should have moved forward. Disappointed. But you know what? We also need to focus at home. And since the October 7th attacks in 2023, the explosion of anti-Semitism that we have seen at our so-called elite universities, I don't call them elite, I just call them expensive universities, on the campuses of the top universities in America has been nothing short of astonishing, disgusting. I don't know what other acronym or adjective I can use, Mr. President, but horrifying. And these are the statistics from the Anti-Defamation League, 2023 to 2024, their annual report on anti-Israel activism on U.S. campuses tallied over 2,000 incidents and anti-Israel incidents of assault, vandalism, harassment, protest actions, divestment resolutions between June of 2023 and May of 2024 increased a staggering 477%. Mr. President, 477% at the top universities in America. This marks the highest number ever documented by the ADL. So I witnessed this at my alma mater, Harvard. My wife and I went there. I don't always talk about it because I'm not proud of it. This university has huge problems. And I was there about a little over a year ago, walking to campus. I went to Widener Library. That's the big, famous library in the middle of Harvard Yard. And went to the reading room during finals of Widener Library, and there was a giant anti-Israel protest in this reading room. Shocking, Mr. President, what was going on at Harvard. And as I wrote then, I couldn't believe this was happening. I took a picture. That's a picture from my camera. This giant anti-Israel protest in the middle of the biggest library, at one of the biggest libraries in America, the reading room at Harvard, pure anti-Semitism protest. And I wrote then, in another op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, talking about my experience, my thoughts then turned to Harvard undergrads. Imagine if you were an 18-year-old Jewish or Israeli student, or even a pro-Israel Catholic like me, and you wanted to study for your chemistry final in the Widener Library reading room on a Sunday morning. This was on a Sunday morning. Imagine being confronted by this protest, obviously condoned by Harvard's leadership and commandeered by the Palestinian Solidarity Committee, the anti-Semitic group behind the notorious statement that held Israel entirely responsible for all the unfolding violence in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. Would you feel welcome in Harvard's most famous library? Would you feel rattled and intimidated and harassed by the anti-Israel banner screaming, "Stop the genocide in Gaza"? As Jason Riley has written, if accusing Israel of genocide isn't defamation of the Jewish people, I don't know what is. If you were that 18-year-old student, would you believe the vacuous statements that had been put out a couple days before by the Harvard Corporation after it decided not to fire Claudine Gay, Harvard's president, that, quote, disruptions of the classroom experience will not be tolerated? That was a giant disruption. So, Mr. President, I ended that op-ed by saying this. Not all university leadership is so craven, morally bankrupt, and afraid of the most radical vocal sects of their own student bodies. As a member of the Naval Academy Board, that university the contrast with the Naval Academy and Harvard couldn't be starker on issues like civil discourse, so-called safe spaces, trigger warnings, American history, and our unique and yes, exceptional place in the world. Mr. President, I know we're talking about the ICC, and we should be, but our universities and our great nation need a huge wake-up call, because as we look at anti-Semitism at the ICC and the UN, we need to be staring at it at places like Harvard and other universities where it has reached disturbing and sickening levels. And I think it's this body's responsibility to do something about it. I yield the floor.